A trucker hauling freight through West Virginia in the dead of winter. The road was empty. The fog was thick. And the hitchhiker he picked up wasn't traveling alone. Russell saw the figure at 2:14 a.m. standing on the shoulder of Route 60. One man. Thumb out. Backpack at his feet. He pulled over. Because that's what you did on a stretch of mountain road this remote. This late. In weather this bad. He told the man to climb in. The man climbed in. But Russell felt the truck shift on its suspension twice. Welcome to Haunted Stories. Russell Dial had been driving long-haul freight for 19 years. He knew his truck the way you know your own body. Every creak. Every sound. Every shift in weight when a load settled. He had picked up exactly 4 hitchhikers in 19 years. Against company policy. Because he was a man who didn't like the idea of someone freezing to death on a mountain road. While he drove past with an empty passenger seat. He told me this story sitting in his driveway in Ohio. Parked beside the same truck. 3 years after it happened. He still drives that route sometimes. He told me he has never picked up another hitchhiker since. He said, I know what I felt that night. I know what the suspension does when one man gets in. And I know what it did when this one did. He said, it wasn't one man's weight. It was January. Deep in the Appalachians. The kind of cold that gets into the cab even with the heater running full blast. Russell was hauling a load of furniture from Charlotte to Columbus. Running behind schedule. Because of an accident that had backed up traffic for 3 hours outside Beckley. By 2 a.m. he was alone on Route 60. Climbing through the mountains in fog so thick his headlights just bounced back at him in a gray wall. He had his CB on. Mostly static. The occasional voice of another driver somewhere out there in the dark doing the same thing he was. Pushing through. Trying to make up time. He saw the man at the edge of his headlights. About 200 feet of visibility to work with. Standing on the shoulder. Backpack at his feet. Thumb out. Not moving much. The way people get when they'd been standing in cold this severe for a long time. And their body has started conserving energy. Russell slowed down. He told himself later that any reasonable person would have kept driving. A stranger on a remote mountain road at 2 in the morning isn't the safest pickup. But the man looked young. Maybe early 20s. Wearing a jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough for the temperature. And Russell had a daughter that age. And he thought about her stranded somewhere cold with nobody stopping. And he pulled over. The man's name, he said, was Tommy. He climbed in. Said thank you in a voice that was quiet. A little hoarse. Like he hadn't talked in a while. He smelled like cold air and diesel exhaust. Like he'd been standing roadside for hours catching fumes from passing trucks. Russell pulled back onto the highway. And that's when he felt it. The truck dipped on its suspension. Not once, the way it should when one passenger settles into the seat. But twice. A second small shift. A half second after the first. Like someone else had climbed in right behind Tommy. Russell glanced over. Just Tommy. Sitting normally. Hands in his lap. Looking out the windshield at the fog. He told himself it was the road. Uneven pavement. He'd been driving for 14 hours straight. He let it go. Tommy didn't talk much for the first 20 minutes. Russell asked the usual questions. Where you headed? How long you been out there? You got family worried about you. Tommy answered in short sentences. Heading to Columbus. Couple hours. No family, not really. Russell noticed Tommy kept glancing at the passenger seat beside him. Even though Tommy himself was the only one sitting in it. He'd glance down and to the right. Like he was checking on something. Or someone. Russell asked him if everything was alright. Tommy said, yeah. Just thinking. Around mile marker 40, the temperature in the cab dropped. Hard enough that Russell reached over and checked the heater controls. Certain something had malfunctioned. The dial was still set where he'd left it. The vents were still blowing warm air. But his breath was fogging in front of his face. And so, he noticed, was Tommy's. Except Tommy's breath seemed to fog more than it should for someone sitting in a heated cab. Russell said, like he hadn't talked in a while. He smelled like cold air and diesel exhaust. Like he'd been standing roadside for hours catching fumes from passing trucks. Russell pulled back onto the highway. And that's when he felt it. The truck dipped on its suspension. Not once, the way it should when one passenger settles into the seat. But twice. A second small shift. A half second after the first. Like someone else had climbed in right behind Tommy. Russell glanced over. Just Tommy. Sitting normally. Hands in his lap. Looking out the windshield at the fog. He told himself it was the road. Uneven pavement. He'd been driving for 14 hours straight. He let it go. Tommy didn't talk much for the first 20 minutes. Russell asked the usual questions. Where you headed? How long you been out there? You got family worried about you. Tommy answered in short sentences. Heading to Columbus. Couple hours. No family, not really. Russell noticed Tommy kept glancing at the passenger seat beside him. Even though Tommy himself was the only one sitting in it. He'd glanced down and to the right. Like he was checking on something. Or someone. Russell asked him if everything was alright. Tommy said, yeah. Just thinking. Around mile marker 40, the temperature in the cab dropped. Hard enough that Russell reached over and checked the heater controls. Certain something had malfunctioned. The dial was still set where he'd left it. The vents were still blowing warm air. But his breath was fogging in front of his face. And so, he noticed, was Tommy's. Except Tommy's breath seemed to fog more than it should for someone sitting in a heated cab. Russell said, heater's broke, I think. Sorry about that. Tommy said, it's not your heater. Russell looked over at him. Tommy was looking at the empty space beside himself again. The space between his own body and the passenger door. And he said very quietly, almost like he wasn't talking to Russell at all. He doesn't like the cold either. Russell's hands tightened on the wheel. He told me that was the moment the unease in his chest turned into something with real weight to it. He said, who doesn't like the cold, Tommy? Tommy didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes forward. On the fog. On the 200 feet of visibility unspooling ahead of the headlights. Then he said, my brother. Russell asked where his brother was. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, he's right here. Russell looked at the passenger seat. Just Tommy. One man. Alone. Sitting with his hands folded. Breath fogging slightly more than the cab temperature should allow. But the suspension. Russell kept coming back to the suspension. He'd felt it dip twice when Tommy climbed in. He'd been driving this truck for 6 years. He knew exactly what 170 pounds felt like settling into that seat. What he'd felt was heavier than that. Like 2 people had climbed in. Not one. He said, Tommy, there's nobody else in this truck. Tommy turned and looked at him. For the first time since getting in. His eyes, in the dashboard glow, looked tired in a way that went beyond ordinary exhaustion. He said, I know that's what you see. Russell said, what do you mean, what I see? Tommy said, he was with me when the truck hit us. Both of us. On this road. Right around here, actually. Maybe a mile up. The cab went very quiet. Just the engine. The tires on wet pavement. The fog pressing against the windshield. Russell said, Tommy, are you telling me you were in an accident? Tommy said, I'm telling you my brother was in an accident. He said, I walked away. He said, he didn't. Russell told me he didn't know what to do with that information. At 2 in the morning. On an empty mountain highway. Fog so thick he could barely see past his own hood. A passenger telling him, calmly, conversationally, that his dead brother was sitting in the seat beside him. He kept driving because stopping felt worse than continuing. He kept his eyes on the road. And he kept the conversation going. Because silence felt like it would let something settle into the cab that he didn't want settling there. he asked when the accident happened. Tommy said, 11 months ago. Right up there, actually. Past that next curve. There's a guardrail that's still bent from where we went through it. Russell knew the spot. Every long-haul driver who ran this route knew it. A sharp curve with a steep drop on the right side. The kind of curve that claimed a vehicle every few years when conditions were bad enough. He hadn't thought about it specifically in months. But now, driving toward it in the dark with Tommy beside him, he found himself slowing down without meaning to. He said, "Tommy, I'm sorry about your brother." Tommy said, "He doesn't think he's gone." Russell glanced over. Tommy said, "That's the thing nobody tells you. He doesn't understand what happened. He keeps trying to get home. He keeps thinking if he just finds the right ride, the right road, he'll get there eventually. I've been trying to walk him there for 11 months, and he keeps stopping at the same spot. Keeps trying to flag down trucks. He thinks if enough people stop, eventually one of them will take him all the way home." Russell said, "And you're with him because?" Tommy said, "Because somebody has to be." He said, "Because he was 23 years old, and he had a whole life waiting, and I can't just let him wander up here alone for the rest of whatever this is." The curve was coming up. Russell could feel it in his hands before he saw it. The way the road started to bend. The guardrail emerging out of the fog on the right side. Visibly damaged. A section bent outward and never repaired. Rust already creeping along the broken metal edge. Tommy went very still beside him. He said, "This is it." He said, "This is where we always stop." Russell slowed the truck without deciding to. He told me his foot just came off the gas on its own. Like his body understood something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. He pulled onto the shoulder. Right at the bent guardrail. Hazards clicking on. Engine idling in the fog. Tommy unbuckled his seatbelt. Russell said, "What are you doing?" Tommy said, "This is as far as he goes tonight." He reached for the door handle. And in that moment, Russell told me, the temperature in the cab dropped one more time. Sharp. Sudden. His breath fogging thick enough to see clearly in the dashboard light. And he heard, for the first time all night, something other than Tommy's voice. A second voice. Younger. Quieter. It said, "Thank you for the ride." Tommy opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Fog curling through the cab. He stepped down onto the shoulder. Into the dark beside the bent guardrail. And he turned back to look at Russell one more time. He said, "Thank you for stopping." He said, "Most people don't stop here anymore." He closed the door. Russell watched him walk toward the guardrail in his rearview mirror. A single figure receding into fog and darkness. Backpack over one shoulder. Then the fog thickened, the way fog does on mountain roads. And Tommy was gone from view entirely. Russell sat there for almost 10 minutes before he could make himself pull back onto the highway. He didn't sleep when he got to Columbus. He sat in a truck stop parking lot, and he searched the accident. The curve. The date. Everything he could think to search. He found it within 20 minutes. A single vehicle accident on Route 60. 11 months earlier. At that exact curve. A car had lost control in icy conditions and gone through the guardrail. 2 occupants. Brothers. 23 and 26 years old. The younger brother had died at the scene. The older brother, the one who survived, had walked away with relatively minor injuries. Russell found a follow-up article from 3 months after the accident. The surviving brother had been struggling. Severe grief, the article said, citing a family member. He had taken to walking the stretch of highway near the accident site. Sometimes late at night. Telling people he was looking for something he'd lost there. The article was from 8 months before the night Russell picked him up. Russell sat in that parking lot for a long time. He kept thinking about the suspension. 2 settling shifts. Not one. He kept thinking about the second voice. Younger and quieter. Thanking him for the ride. He kept thinking about Tommy's exact words. He keeps trying to get home. He keeps thinking if he just finds the right ride, Eventually one of them will take him all the way home. He has never been able to fully decide what he believes happened that night. Whether Tommy himself had died at some point in the 11 months since the accident. And what Russell picked up was not one living man explaining his dead brother, but two ghosts traveling together. One still convinced he was alive and capable of explaining the other. Or whether Tommy was alive. Genuinely alive. Walking that highway at night carrying a grief so total it had taken physical form beside him. And whether what Russell felt in the suspension, what he heard in that second voice, was something his own mind built out of Tommy's words in the cold and the fog and 14 hours of driving with no sleep. He told me he doesn't know which answer scares him more. He told me the last thing. The thing he thinks about every time he drives that stretch of Route 60 now. Slowing down without meaning to as he approaches that bent guardrail. He said, I still see him sometimes. Standing there. Thumb out. Same spot. He said, I don't stop anymore. He said, I don't think he's looking for a ride to Columbus anymore. He said, I think he's just looking for someone who'll stop long enough to tell him he's allowed to stop walking. This has been Haunted Stories. Subscribe if you dare.